Hi everyone, it's Miss Saw, Head of English at King Alfred's Academy again. I'm here with the second video of this week, which is about how to help you to develop your analytical paragraphs to provide a much more precise and detailed insight and understanding of what the poet is trying to convey to us, to show us, and how he or she does this. Okay, so on top of our statement, quote, and inference, which we have written in the last video about extract from the prelude, the way in which to develop our analytical paragraphs and provide more detail and therefore show much more precision about what we understand the poet is showing us, we can develop our analytical paragraphs through the use of connotations, effects, and development. So I'm just going to explain briefly what these three things are and what they help you to show to clearly show even what you've understood. Okay, so connotations help you to clearly show the reader of your analysis which words in particular and which language techniques have been deliberately used by the poet to suggest relevant ideas. So it's showing your understanding even more. Okay, and then you go on to explain what those relevant ideas are and how they've been used to communicate something to do with the theme being explored that you will have already claimed in your statement. Okay, so it's still linking back to the original statement. Then the effects help you to show clearly that you understand what the writer or poet in this case is trying to get us to realise, think and feel about the theme, in this case the power of nature, that he's exploring in his poem. So we'll have done this a little bit in our inference section already, but now it's about going into more detail, showing you really understand the poet's aims regarding what he's trying to communicate to us about the power of nature. Finally then is the development, and this is, if you like, the cherry on the cake, and this helps you to clearly show that you understand the poet is either clearly conveying this idea in more than one way, in more than one part of his poem, by providing another quote that you feel also shows the same ideas and explaining how that quote shows those ideas, or by actually explaining in your original quote there's more than one idea to do with the theme of nature. Okay, there's multiple ideas that this poet is trying to convey about the theme of nature through this line that we've quoted from his poem. Okay, so it's about developing even further your insight and showing off your understanding of what the poet's communicating to us. All right, so we're going to write, we're going to add on to the SQI that you've already written about extract from the prelude. So you're going to need that in front of you. It will also be helpful, if you can, to have your notes in front of you from when you watched the video about the extract from the prelude last week, because you can use those to help you as well. Okay, so we're going to move on and first of all start by focusing on connotations. So, as I said, I'm going to talk you step by step through how to do each part. So we're just going to focus on connotations to start with. So how to write successfully about connotations. As I said, connotations is about the key words in the quote that the poet has deliberately and intentionally used because they have certain relevant ideas linked to them. Okay, if you think about what the word means, it immediately gives you some ideas that the poet's trying to convey about nature. Okay, and it's also potentially looking at any language techniques like repetition, like personification, that the poet has deliberately used as well in order to convey ideas about nature. We're going to explain what those ideas are and making sure that what we're saying links back to our overall claim in our statement. So throughout this video, I am going to model and you are going to write about extract from the prelude, and the theme we'll both be exploring is going to continue to be the power of nature. All right. So here's an example of connotation. Okay, so I'm building on my SQI paragraph that I wrote about extract from the prelude. If you remember, I said that the poet conveys the idea that that nature is powerful and has a psychological effect on man. And I talked about the idea that this memory of the huge and mighty forms, the mountains, if you like, played on his mind. Okay, that was the idea behind the quote that I provided. So I'm now going to go into more detail about particular words that were used in that quote, and what they connote. What do they suggest? So in particular, the adjective mighty connotes the idea that the speaker has been permanently left with the impression the mountains, which are used to represent nature as a whole, if you like, are much bigger and more powerful than he is. This is further supported with the use of the adjective huge, which is repeated from a previous line in the poem to emphasize this idea. The fact he uses the adverb slowly to describe how these images move through his mind also connotes the idea that he is dwelling on them because they are troubling to him. Okay, so if you remember, my full quote was huge and mighty forms moved slowly through the mind. So you can see I've pulled out the word mighty, I've pulled out the adjective huge, and I've pulled out the adverb slowly describing how something is moving. Okay, so how have I built my connotation step by step? So the first step is to start by picking out a particular word from your quote that you think implies important and relevant ideas relating to the statement you gave at the start of your paragraph. So you should have that in front of you now. Ideally, identifying the word type as well. So in my case, I've put in particular, always a good way to start connotations, by the way, because it says, look, I'm going to look at particular words now. In particular, the adjective, the describing word, mighty. So I've picked out the word I'm going to talk about first. Then I'm going to explain the relevant ideas that you link and associate with that word, which will help you to further prove your statement. So I'm going to talk about what the word mighty means and how it could be suggesting relevant ideas about nature and how the speaker feels about nature. So the word mighty connotes the idea that the speaker has been permanently left with the impression the mountains, which are used to represent nature, are much bigger and more powerful than he is. That's kind of what the word mighty means, right? Big and powerful. So that's what I'm explaining. I'm explaining that's the relevant ideas this word connotes. Okay. And finally, if you can, talk about other keywords in the quotes. You've done one, but are there any others that you could provide and that also present relevant ideas that you could explain? Okay. So in this case, this is further supported with the use of the adjective huge, which is repeated from a previous line in the poem to emphasize this idea. So again, I'm talking about an adjective there. The fact that he uses the adverb slowly to describe how these images move through his mind, so I'm explaining how that word's being used, also connotes the idea that he is dwelling on them, these ideas, and this image, because they are troubling to him. So if you remember, my original statement was, in his poem, Extract from the Prelude, Wordsworth suggests that nature is more powerful than man. So yeah, I'm saying these words definitely convey that, they show that, and can have a psychological effect on him. So yeah, it's troubling him, all right? He keeps replaying it in his mind. And my full quotation, where I've got these keywords from, was huge and mighty forms moved slowly through the mind, okay? Remember, once we've done this, we need to reread it and check it makes sense as a whole. So in particular, the adjective mighty connotes the idea that the speaker has been permanently left with the impression the mountains, which are used to represent nature, are much bigger and more powerful than he is. This is further supported with the use of the adjective huge, which is repeated from a previous line in the poem to emphasize this idea. The idea that he uses the adverb slowly, the fact that he uses the adverb slowly to describe how these images move through his mind also connotes the idea that he is dwelling on them because they are troubling to him. Okay, yep, that makes sense. So we're going to move on. I've now written a connotation. I've shown you step by step how to build this up. I'm now going to ask you to have a go at writing some sentences in which you explain the connotations, so the things we link and associate with, the key words in the quotation that you have already provided to support the statement you've given. So the statement, quote, and inference that you wrote in the previous video about Extract from the Prelude, you're now going to look at that quote and you're going to think, what keywords could I talk about that specifically suggest relevant ideas about nature that obviously Wordsworth is trying to show us, okay? So you're going to follow this step by step, firstly picking out the particular word, thinking about how you're going to start. So in particular, the, and then you're going to try and identify the word type. Is that word a noun, an adjective, a verb, or an adverb? And I've given you a little box at the bottom here to help you in terms of working out what kind of word it is. And then you're going to go on to explain the relevant ideas that you link and associate with that word. So this word connotes the idea that. And then finally, you're going to talk about any other keywords in the quote that you feel are also relevant and also connote particular ideas about nature that are relevant and linked to your overall statement. I've given you some top tips. So think about the keywords in the quote. Try and identify the type of word it's used. Shows you have an even better understanding of what the poet's trying to do and how he's doing it. Think about what each word means, okay? And what it is therefore implying about nature that is relevant, okay? And then stretches also, is this word being used as part of a language technique? Is it part of personification? Is it part of repetition? Is it being used as part of something else that also helps to convey a relevant idea? So can you explain that as well? All right. And remember, once you've finished writing your connotation, reread it to check it makes sense as a whole. So I'm going to stop talking. I'm going to ask you to pause the video. And I'm going to ask you to add on to your SQI analytical paragraph some connotation section now. All right. So we have written our connotations. We've now done SQIC. The next part is effect. So how to write a successful part of your analytical paragraph demonstrating your understanding of the effects the poet is intentionally trying to have on us. So it's a detailed explanation of what the writer has deliberately set out to make us think and feel and conclude, if you like. Okay? Again, extract from a prelude, power of nature is our theme. Here's my example. Okay, if you remember, my original statement was, in his poem, Extract from the Prelude, Wordsworth suggests that nature is more powerful than man and can have a psychological effect on him. So my effect, how I explain the effect the writer is clearly trying to have on me as a reader, needs to support my overall statement that I gave right at the start of the paragraph. They kind of need to link together. The effect I've written is, this is designed to create a sense of discomfort and a feeling of human insignificance. So if you remember, that means not important, okay, when compared to nature. So humans feel it not important when compared to nature because they're so small, nature's so big. The speaker is clearly disturbed by his realization that nature is much bigger and more powerful than he is. If you remember, the speaker is just the voice in the poem, the person speaking. And the thought does not sit well with him, causing some distress as it plays on his mind. Okay, so that's my effect. That's how I've explained it. So how do we do this step by step? Well, firstly, I explain what the key words and quote as a whole is designed to create a sense of. So what's it meant to make us think and feel? Try to start with the phrase, either the phrase, this is designed to create a sense of, and then follow it with a feeling, or the poet does this in order to convey the idea that, and then explain what we're supposed to think. All right. So in my case, I've started with, this is designed to create a sense of discomfort and a feeling of human insignificance when compared to nature. Okay, so it's designed to make us feel certain things. Next, I'm then going to go on to explain how the poets managed to create this idea, feeling, and sense through what the speaker says in the poem, showing that we've understood what it is the poet is intending us to conclude. What does he want us to leave this poem thinking about nature? All right. And we need to make sure that what we say here links back to our original statement at the start of the paragraph. So I've put, the speaker is clearly disturbed by his realization that nature is much bigger and more powerful than he is. That links nicely with the fact it's having a psychological effect on him in my statement. And the thought does not sit well with him, causing him some distress as it plays on his mind. So again, psychological effect because of the power of nature. All right. So let's check it, reread it, check it makes sense as a whole. This is designed to create a sense of discomfort and a feeling of human insignificance when compared to nature. The speaker is clearly disturbed by his realization that nature is much bigger and more powerful than he is, and the thought does not sit well with him, causing him some distress as it is playing on his mind. Yep, makes sense. We're going to move on, and I'm going to ask you to have a go. Building on top of your connotations that you've written from the past slides, you're now going to have a go at writing some sentences in which you explain the effects the quotation and the keywords and images have been deliberately designed to have on us. What's it meant to make us think and feel, and therefore conclude about nature and how it affects man. All right, so you're going to follow these 2 steps. Firstly, explain what the keywords are designed to create a sense of. How is it meant to make us feel or think? And then go on to explain how the poet's done this. What does he have the speaker say and do in order to make us feel this way? Okay. Top tip, think about what it is the poet is intending to make us think and feel. What is he asking us to walk away from this poem thinking about nature? All right. Especially having read that line that you've quoted, what are we supposed to walk away from that line thinking about nature? So pause the video and have a go. And remember, once you've written it, reread it and check that it makes sense as a whole. I'm going to stop talking. You're going to pause and have a go at writing that underneath your connotations. Right, we are so nearly there. This is the last part. So we've got our statement, we've got our quotation, we've got our inference, we've now got connotations, looking at keywords and language techniques as well. We've talked about the intended effects that the poet is hoping to have on us. This is the cherry on the cake. This is the last bit to wrap up our paragraph and really show off. So how to write a successful development. If you remember, I said that a development section does one of 2 things normally. Either it explains any relevant additional ideas that the writer is possibly trying to communicate to us with the quote that you have already provided. So is there another idea about nature that's being suggested through the quote you've given us, explaining that in our development? Or is there another quote from the poem that you can provide that clearly is also trying to show us the same idea that your quote from right at the beginning of your paragraph is showing us? So this idea that the poet is obviously trying to communicate this idea to us because he's doing it in more than one place in his poem. All right. And then you're going to explain what the second quote also shows us and how it shows us the same idea. This is my development that I would add on to the end after I've finished writing my effect in this case. And I've said this idea, so the idea that nature is very powerful and has a psychological effect on man. So the idea that is in my original statement here. This idea is further supported in the final line of the poem when he states that memory of these powerful natural forms were a trouble to my dreams, implying that even when he was unconscious, asleep, he was dreaming, this feeling of insignificance, not being important, in the face of nature, psychologically distressed him. Okay, it played on his mind in a bad way, leaving him feeling uneasy and perhaps giving him nightmares. Okay, so just clearly this poet is really trying to show us that nature's had a psychological effect on man, because not only does it show us this in the first quote I gave you, but here's another quote. It also shows us this. Okay, so this is how I'm going to develop my paragraph to really put the nail in the coffin with my argument and go, this is definitely what the poet's trying to show us, because he's shown us this idea in more than one quote now. All right, so that's my development. How did I build this up? Well, firstly, I start by stating that the idea I've already shown is also supported or shown in another part of the poem, providing a quote and explaining what and why and why it has been said. So this idea in my original statement is further supported in the final line of the poem. So when it was said, when he states that the memory of these powerful natural forms were a trouble to my dreams. So provided another quote that I am claiming shows, again, this is what the poet's trying to communicate to us about nature. Then I go on to explain what this additional quote is also implying, ensuring that what I say definitely still supports my original statement. So my original statement's at the bottom. In Extract from the Prelude, Wordsworth suggests that nature is more powerful than man and can have a psychological effect on him. So whatever I say about this second quote now needs to still support my statement right at the beginning of my paragraph. So I'm going to say, implying that even when he was unconscious, this feeling of insignificance in the face of nature psychologically, there's my link to my statement, distressed him, leaving him feeling uneasy and perhaps giving him nightmares. Okay, so this is my development. It's just a little bit extra, if you like, of me proving without a shadow of a doubt this is what the poet is trying to show. Now, if you can't find a second quote to back up your first one, there is an alternative that you can do in your development, which is if you really can't find another quote in the poem, is to have a look at your first quote again and see, is there anything else that I haven't already said that is being implied by this quote to do with the power of nature and man? Okay, so what else could I say the poet is possibly suggesting that would be relevant from this quote? If I can find anything, that's what I'm going to add here. So I could start with, furthermore, the poet could also be said to be suggesting that from this original quote. All right. And as always, remember, once you have done this, reread to check it makes sense as a whole. This is something I probably should have done before I started recording this video, because as you can see, I've got a typo. So if I was handwriting this, I'd go back and edit this now. So this idea is further supported in the final line of the poem when he states that always important to proofread, that the memory of these powerful natural forms were a trouble to my dreams, implying that even when he was unconscious, this feeling of insignificance in the face of nature psychologically distressed him, mentally distressed him, leaving him feeling uneasy and perhaps giving him nightmares. Makes sense, especially if I'd gone back and edited that word. That's why we proofread. So, it's your turn. You've got your S, your Q, your I, your C, and your E in front of you. It is probably looking fairly long by now. This is the last bit. I promise you that I'm going to ask you to add to this. This is the last bit that we need to try and do. Step by step, here's what you need to do. You can have a go at either trying to add relevant additional secondary ideas that the writer's trying to communicate with us with the quote you've already given, okay? Or you could provide, as I did, a second quote. I went back through the poem. I went and tried to find a new image that also supported the same idea and explain what that idea is again, okay? A big extension would be, can you do both? Can you say a further relevant idea that the first quote is suggesting and then go on to find a second quote that backs that up? That would be a very impressive thing to do. Remember, when you have finished, you proofread and make sure it makes sense as a whole. I've given you some top tips again, so look back through the poem to see if you can find a line or a description. It doesn't have to be a whole line, remember, it could be a word or just a phrase that shows a similar idea to the one you've already presented with your first quote. Or if you can't find another line, can you have a look at your original quote, and is there anything else that you could explain that you think the poet is using this line to convey or show us about the power of nature and how it has an effect on man? Okay, give it a go. This is the trickiest bit. Sorry, it should say at the top how to write successfully about development on this page. This is the trickiest bit. Give it a go. See what you can do. It might be something that you find quite difficult, but just try your best and submit what you can at the end. So I'm going to stop talking. I'm going to ask you to pause the video for the last time and add that last bit onto your analytical paragraph for me. And finally, success! We have created a detailed analytical paragraph. This is what it looks like when you bring all the different parts of Squice together to create a very detailed analytical paragraph. So I'm hoping yours looks a bit like this. This is quite long, but you can see how you're building up the detail here. So I start all the way back to my statement and go all the way through the 6 different parts of SQUICE to get a much more detailed analytical paragraph. You could see how the reader of your analysis can't be left with any doubt now as to your understanding of how the poet's shown you these ideas. So in his poem, Extract from the Prelude, Wordsworth suggests that nature is more powerful than man and can have a psychological effect on him. This is implied when he describes how huge and mighty forms move slowly through the mind when he recalls the night he rode out into the lake for many days to come. This creates an image of the speaker being tormented by the memory of the frightening mountains for days after he saw them, constantly picturing them in his head, almost like they gave him waking nightmares because they were so big and mighty. It suggests that they made him feel insignificant and small in comparison, and that this troubled his thoughts and played on his mind. As such, the poet is clearly showing that the size and power of nature had a negative psychological effect on him. In particular, the adjective mighty connotes the idea that the speaker has been permanently left with the impression the mountains, which are used to represent nature, are much bigger and more powerful than he is. This is further supported with the use of the adjective huge, which is repeated from a previous line in the poem to emphasise this idea. The fact that he uses the adverb slowly to describe how these images move through his mind also connotes the idea that he is dwelling on them because they are troubling to him. This is designed to create a sense of discomfort and a feeling of human insignificance when compared to nature. The speaker is clearly disturbed by his realization that nature is much bigger and more powerful than he is, and the thought does not sit well with him, causing him some distress as it is playing on his mind. This idea is further supported in the final line of the poem when he states that the memory of these powerful natural forms were a trouble to his dreams, implying that even when he was unconscious, this feeling of insignificance in the face of nature psychologically distressed him, leaving him feeling uneasy and perhaps even giving him nightmares. Okay. Now that you have your own detailed analytical paragraph about Extract from the Prelude, which we've used the whole of SQUICE to create, you need to show it off, guys, so that you can get the absolute deserved praise and recognition that you've earned by working your way through this video. So please do take a picture, or if you've typed it, upload the document onto Show My Homework so that your teacher can see what you have done. All right, this is a really big deal. This skill is the most important skill when doing any sort of reading analysis in English. And once you've mastered it, this is what we use whenever we analyse any text. So once you know how to do this, you've unlocked a massive part of your GCSE. And it can only get better from here on in and much, much easier each time you do it. So a big well done from me, because well done for sticking with me, well done for doing it. And you should be really chuffed and proud of yourself for everything that you've done. We will be working with you to further improve this, obviously, but it's a big, big milestone to get this far. So please do go and reward yourself with a break and pat yourself on the back and celebrate the fact that you've got this far. Well done, guys. I will speak to you again soon, no doubt. But in the meantime, take care and stay safe.